Greetings, everyone. Biracial Blurred here with another podcast. So, I wanted to discuss again, and I know I've mentioned them before, these really hard video games that I just can't stop playing. So, there's this company that makes single player games called From Software, and the president, Hidetaki Miyazaki, is known for making these really crazy, immersive, hard video games. And what makes them hard is one, the boss fights, right? Sometimes the world design and just some of the mechanics as well within the games. And I've really enjoyed the challenge of these games, and I'm not exactly sure why. I mean, maybe things have changed, maybe I need more brain stimulation, but when I was younger, if a game was hard, I wasn't playing it. I got super frustrated. I remember one of the games I had when I was young was Mario is Missing, and you can't die in it. So that's the type of games I was playing because I was so bad at video games. Whereas now, I'd say I'm decent. Like, occasionally I like, a first-person shooter, even against, actual people, and that challenge. And I really seem to enjoy these experiences with these hard video games from Software. They're known for Demon Souls, Dark Souls, Bloodborne, and most recently Sekiro, Shadows Die Twice. And maybe you've heard of these, maybe you haven't. I'm not entirely sure, my listeners, how involved in these video games are, because it's not like a big GTA, which I think, or Mortal Kombat, which the average person I talk to in America, at least, and probably Europe, knows what the heck that is. Like, they'll probably understand if I say, hey, Mortal Kombat, oh, that really violent game. Or GTA, oh, that game where you can go crazy and rob cars and shoot people. People understand those, people have heard of those. Some people don't know these as much because there's a very hard barrier to entry. Almost every single one of these games has a very, very hard beginning level. Like, the early game for most of these games is really challenging. Except for Dark Souls. I think Dark Souls beginning surprises you, but isn't insanely challenging. But, yeah. So, it's definitely different, and a lot of people usually don't expect what happens in the game as a whole. And the reason why is, so let's just talk about some of the things. Like mechanics. Unlike a lot of RPGs or certain games where you get stats, you gain power. Like, they're permanent, right? And that works too, but most of the time you don't lose your experience on death, right? Like, you die, and okay, you start again from a save point, and you go from there. Or action adventure, okay, you start from a checkpoint, and you go back from there. Now, Dark Souls, you do start from a checkpoint, but when you die, you lose all the stats that you've gained in terms of experience points. And you gotta go back and get them, or they're gone for good. So, what makes it crazy is sometimes, not so much in Sekiro, but what makes it crazy is often Dark Souls, like, you could be at one bonfire way over here, and you've been fighting for an hour, and you're looking for that next bonfire, but you're low on health. No more healing. Do you go further? Or do you go all the way back to the bonfire and reset the whole level to fight everything again? Right, so those mechanics are really, really challenging. The areas, there's often very crazy things without them. Miyazaki, the creator, loves poison pools that slow down the character and make you poison. Some places have crazy traps. Some places have really hard enemies that are almost little mini bosses in themselves. Some places might have just a strange mechanic that makes things really difficult. Like, for example, Bloodborne has this challenge dungeon where you're at half health the entire time. So a lot of these things will have very difficult things that makes it hard to get to the next checkpoint. And, you're not sure if you ever want to keep going back to it. Sekiro kind of removes some of this because of the verticality and also how close the checkpoints are in Sekiro compared to other From Software games. But the difficulty is higher in Sekiro in some ways, so you might die more frequently, but you can restart quite quickly too. Like, hey, you died on the boss, you got like 30 seconds to get back. And let's talk about the bosses. So this is probably outside of the difficulty, some of the craziness with, the combat. And the reason why I'm not getting too much into combat and specs, because there's a distinct difference between what you're doing. Dark Souls has very particular builds and armor you can use depending on what you want to do. Do you want to do a two-handed sword? Do you want to be a magician? Do you want to be a walking tank with a shield? Depends on your build, all right? Versus Bloodborne, which depends on your weapon and sometimes certain stats. You want to be a magician with quick weapons? Do you want to be a person who's really good at shooting guns, actually, instead? Like, totally different style, like someone's really skilled with the guns rather than those swords. Armor isn't much of a thing, but the weapons builds are really particular in Bloodborne. Whereas in Sekiro, it depends on what prosthetics you want to use, but there's not too many builds because you're just one build. However, I do see people do different things in terms of that. Plus, the combat is significantly faster and different in Sekiro versus the other ones. But let's get back to bosses. So, the bosses in all of these games are phenomenal. They are insanely hard, some way harder than others. And they are also quite spectacles to see, ranging from huge beasts to very skilled humanoid types, not because they're not always humans. And yeah, they make a lot of really interesting dynamics in terms of all the different things going on within the universe. And what makes them so great is that when you finally win against these challenging bosses, I can't think of, besides like legit beating a long great game, like when I beat Persona 5, which like without extras is like 110 hours to fully beat the game in a run through. It was just a great experience. It was cathartic, like, I've had that journey, now I must leave these characters. Versus Dark Souls, it's like, or FromSoft games, it's like, I finally beat this boss, it took me forever, and often will take very, very long. Some of these bosses I've been at for multiple days. There are some bosses I've been at for multiple hours. Like, for example, the final boss of Sekiro, have tested him out maybe an hour, 2 hours a day for the past 3 or 4 days. Can't really say I've made progress. That's not true. I've definitely made progress. But a lot of these games, the bosses are just so challenging, and it's a lot on your patience. Bloodborne had a boss, couldn't beat it one day, couldn't beat it the next day. Slept on it. Literally woke up in the middle of the night needing to beat this boss. It just drove me nuts. Dark Souls 3, for sure. Same thing with how challenging a lot of these bosses are. Dark Souls 1, I would say, is the easiest, but not all bosses are perfect because some of them have weird mechanics that you can get through. But there are some very, very amazing bosses throughout this whole series that are considered some of the best bosses in video game history. When I think about it, in Sekiro, Bloodborne and its DLC, and Dark Souls as a whole, I haven't played Demon Souls, but Dark Souls as a whole, there's got to be at least 5 bosses that I'm like, I think they're better than almost any game, and there's certainly 10 bosses throughout the series, which you'd have to put in top 10 conversations over across all games ever made. But there's at least 5 that are best boss ever, for sure. But anyways, I definitely wanted to delve into that. Hopefully I beat Sekiro. Still working at it. Beating the other ones, but I love it. I don't know. I enjoy the challenge. It gets very frustrating. Insanely frustrating. More frustrating than almost any game ever, but it's very, very rewarding. One of the most rewarding feelings ever from a game when you finally win or beat a boss. It's just very gratifying. So, highly recommend you check them out if you haven't already. There isn't an easy one of these, but you definitely have to keep at it. I'd say Bloodborne's probably the best one. Sekiro has a very hard difficulty wall. So does Bloodborne too. And they always say don't use guides unless you're really, really stuck, because there's moments in all the games where you figure out something and then you get really good at the game, and then it destroys you again with a boss where you have to get even better. I would actually say start with Dark Souls 1. In my opinion, it's the easiest out of the ones I've played, and it's also probably has one of the best stories and kind of cool lore, and certainly one of the best layouts for a world. Like there is nothing like this isn't difficult, but this is an amazing part of these games is they're very interconnected, which is really cool. And Dark Souls especially, the first one, is very good for that. So hope you had a blast. Take care, everybody.